moderator today is Dr. Stavros Karaberidis. Dr. Karaberidis is a lecturer in maritime economics in the Department of International Shipping, Logistics and Operations at Plymouth University. Stavros is also regularly invited to deliver guest lectures at merchant maritime academies around the globe. His primary research interests are in shipping and ports logistics, maritime cyber and physical security, employability of millennials in logistics, and maritime risk management. Together with Chronis, we will have Mr. Torbjorn Dimbland. Mr. Dimbland is the CIO of Anglo-Eastern Ship Management in Hong Kong. As CIO, Torbjorn is responsible for Anglo-Eastern's digitalization journey. Prior to joining Anglo-Eastern, he spent 12 years as a consultant, overseeing software engagements and providing advisory services in the telecommunications, finance, retail, and logistics industry. Torbjorn entered shipping in 2005 with Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics, where he drove the evolution of enterprise platforms to enhance supply chain efficiency and operational excellence. Last but not least, we have with us Mr. Spiros Georgiou. Mr. Georgiou is Managing Director APAC at Navarino, a leading satellite communications and IT solutions provider for the maritime market. Based in Hong Kong, he is leading Navarino's operations in the Asia-Pacific region, including the implementation of the company's commercial strategy, as well as vertical and horizontal management. Spiros has more than 12 years of professional experience in the shipping industry, and he holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from University of Patras in Greece. Thank you all, and let me remind you one more time that you can leave any comments or questions you may have in the chat box. And Stavros, over to you.
Thank you very much, Maria, for the warm introduction, and thank you very much, Chroni, for the great presentation. It was really appreciated. There were very angles that I could probably hack from Chroni's presentation, because it was, as I said, up to the top of what is happening outside the maritime sector. But what I would like to start is that, as Chroni's mentioned, that maritime sector is a big part of the supply chain. And we really have to keep in mind that a couple of days ago, actually mid-November, we had the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement that 15 leaders from 15 countries in the Asia-Pacific region had signed, one of the biggest free trade deals in history, covering 2.2 billion people and nearly 30% of global's economic output. And the overall aim of that kind of agreement, of course, was to ease the efficiency of the supply chains and how we can move easier the overall trade. So we really have to keep in mind that maritime sector is a big part of those supply chains, and we're going to have more and more force for digitalization that's going to take place, so we can ease the operations. But we also operate at the same time with the COVID-19 environment. So how I would like to start the overall discussion was that, and probably we can start with Torbjorn, as probably Chronis is still trying to collect some of the data from the beautiful polls that he has run. It's like, Torbjorn, what has been the current maritime cybersecurity landscape, and what has been the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? If you can give us some kind of brief output of what's happening out there. Torbjorn, I think you're muted. Yes. We can't hear you.
Let's change that.
Yeah.
Let's start with the pandemic itself. I mean, I think our industry has been affected, you know, as with every industry, but it's really been a challenge, particularly for the crew. I mean, and of course the logistics chain to and from the ship, and that in itself has caused a number of operational issues for every ship owner, every ship manager, everyone who has anything to do with shipping, and of course an enormous burden on the crew themselves. I think as far as offices are concerned, you know, ship managers, ship owners, and everyone in the industry on the office side is affected in the same way everyone else is. You know, we're all working from home, at least partially, if not permanently. And that's also, of course, led to changes in the way we've had to work. Sort of stating the obvious. Look at the way we are all around this panel today. As far as the industry and cybersecurity is concerned, Cronus touched upon this. We can see that the amount of activity that is happening that is directed towards our industry is really growing. There's a company called Naval Dome that says or offers statistics that it's gone up by something like 400% this year alone, and that was just the first half of the year. I think the most worrying thing, and again, as Cronus referenced in his presentation, is that this is less about perhaps ransomware and the typical things that you would see in an office attack, but it's far more focused on the IoT environment on a ship, which is really a major concern for everyone who's involved in shipping.
Thank you very much. Cronus, what is your intake on that? And have you managed to collect any of the beautiful statistics that you're doing during the presentation?
Well, first of all, I have to say I fully agree with Torbjörn, because from our side, we are seeing the same thing. Obviously, some of the statistics that exist out there would need to be further analyzed, but it is the reality that we have moved away from the ransomware specific attacks to more sophisticated, more targeted into causing business interruption events, because this on the one hand, in the cost benefit discussion from a hacker's perspective, offers the biggest value for their attacks. We did see that in these responses, the majority of the students, the majority of the participants actually concur with what we have discussed. And I think I do believe that it is the COVID pandemic. It is something that has affected the industry, but if we try to look on the positive side of things, it also facilitated the digital transformation because of the Black Swan event, where everything had to be done so quickly. The digital transformation that we have been discussing in the industry for several years now was accelerated. So let's try and look at the positive side of things for once.
Mm-hmm. And if I may, Stavros, I can only echo that and talk about our own organization. And I know I'm not alone in this case, in this example, but just the movement, for example, to Office 365 for office workers. I mean, these are projects that were planned that would take months, and in the end, many organizations, ours included, did this in days. How this has accelerated the digital agenda has been really quite fantastic, and that is certainly a very positive thing to think about.
Mm-hmm. I like the fact that we were talking about positive things, but Cronus mentioned earlier on that we have more sophisticated attacks. Is it about more sophisticated attacks, or is it about the crew that is saturated? We're reading in the news that it's difficult for crew to move around because of the COVID-19. It's difficult to change the crew on board, and we're always focusing on what is happening in the office. Is that a problem? That does crew saturation lead to more increased exposure to cyber attacks, you think, Torben?
I think the hypothesis is correct. I don't have any factual evidence to say it has or it hasn't. What I do know is that thousands of seafarers have been on board for far longer than their contracts stipulate that they should be, and as a result, there's fatigue. There's fatigue in the entire existence on board. Now, they've also, of course, been connected in a way that they perhaps haven't been connected in the past. Their reliance on that connectivity has absolutely increased. I know that most shipping organizations typically have increased the amount of available data for each crew member on a personal basis. Absolutely a must, and something that should be done everywhere. I certainly hope there are many other industries doing the same. But again, that means that people are just going to be more likely to click on that malicious link, more likely to perhaps go down a rabbit hole that leads them into potentially downloading something that they shouldn't be. And that really is a challenge that it's there. I just don't have any statistics around how often it may have occurred or not. We've been lucky so far, touch wood.
Okay, as you're talking about statistics, I'm going to look to Cronus. Do you have anything, Cronus?
So we do have some statistics, but I would like actually to share personal insights on this. And being a Navy officer for more than 15 years, obviously it's the Navy, it's a different environment, but more or less the principles are the same. When we were deployed for 6+ months in specific operations, initially we started off by following every security protocol that was in there, but the fatigue that Torbjorn mentioned was a factor that over time created issues. Obviously, being a Navy vessel, the security measures were in place, the technical elements to protect us from any malicious behavior, but I can tell you the creativity of the crew is unprecedented. And as younger generations are joining commercial vessels, they are tech savvy. They know sometimes how to bypass specific security measures that are in place. And also from the audits that we are conducting as Hudson, we are seeing some amazing things on board ships regarding bypassing security measures to access the internet and download illegal material. But I will leave it there.
Okay, so we're having sophisticated stuff that's happening on board. We have tired people, let's call it that way. We have more sophisticated attacks. Spiro, what are the reasons behind the recent surge in maritime cyber attacks? Because Torbjorn mentioned earlier on that was for the first half of the year, we have recorded some kind of increase according to some statistics that were available on the web. And what lessons can we learn to enhance cybersecurity, if we can take any?
Yes. Hello. What I fully agree with what it was mentioned earlier, and I think that the COVID-19 pandemic, the conditions that COVID-19 pandemic brought to us, accelerated a lot of developments. The digitalization was accelerated. Shipping companies had to adapt in a very short period of time, and they had to find solutions actually to continue operating under these conditions. And at the end, I think most of the shipping companies, they have done this. Everything has been working fine despite all the difficulties. So this meant that we have seen an increased requirement for example, for connectivity towards the vessels. A lot of things are happening remotely now. The crew has remained on board for a prolonged period of times. They need more communication options. They need more communication facilities to spend all this additional time on the vessels. In practice, we have seen that the volume of data that the vessels are exchanging, at least for the majority of the shipping companies, have been increased 3 to 4 times during this period. As a result, the cyber risk has also increased, taking into consideration that a lot of shipping companies are in different stages in digitalization. They rely more on information technology systems and solutions, both on the office and on the vessel. I think that what we have experienced during almost 1 year is that the shipping companies have been in different levels of preparation, let's say, to meet this kind of to address this kind of situation. So I think that a lot of shipping companies have done a lot of work before the COVID-19 pandemic. So they had certain, they have to a certain at least extent risk management into their security policies, into their SMS. They have proper infrastructure on board, and this enabled them to do the extra step when it was required. This enabled them to provide all these services when it was needed, so to accelerate the development practically. And this enabled them to have remote access, or to be able to do remote deployments on the vessel, and have all these facilities to navigate through this situation. So I think this is the most, this is the lesson that we can see from this situation that we have been through for almost 1 year. Those companies that were prepared, they have managed to go through not easy, but without any hard difficulties.
Torben, do you agree with that kind of statement, or response that we got from Spiros, or you have a different view?
I perhaps have a little more of a nuanced view. In my experience, I think companies have done a terrific job as far as the SMS is concerned. I think the risk management side of it is really very strong. Where I think there are, I don't want to say gaps, but areas that we need to continue to focus on, and that is the crew, the human element, which is something I think we're going to talk about a little bit more a little bit later. And I think on the technology side, though, to be honest, the preparedness is I think really varies. It depends on the sophistication of the vessel itself. So, cruise lines which aren't operating very much these days, they have very advanced networks on board. They have very advanced systems on board. They've got to have the type of connectivity that you would really expect to have on shore. Same with research vessels, or even some of the most advanced.
Switch off your camera. Can you please switch off your camera? You need to have your camera switched off. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, again, research vessels or even the most advanced container vessels, those I think from a technology perspective are traditionally would have been in better shape. I think some of the older ships, ships that are perhaps simpler, smaller, where IT, it hasn't really played a significant role. Those types of vessels, those are the ones where I think there's still some gaps on the technology side, and they need to be addressed, because whether it's old operating systems like Windows XP or Windows 7, that type of thing exists, and to a large degree in our industry, but also as far as software to detect, software to actually deal with a threat, and so on and so forth. Those things have largely been absent in the past.
Thank you very much, sir. Ronnie, before I move to you, just to remind you that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box so we can keep them all together and we can have a further discussion later on. Ronnie?
One thing that I would like to bring into this discussion, which I think is very relevant both to what Spiros and Torbjörn are saying, is that the element of culture. In the industry for several years, we have developed the safety culture as part of the ISM code because we understood what were the risks. Later on, after 9/11, the ISPS code was introduced. So it took us a few years, but the security culture was also became paramount in the industry. Now it is time to think about creating a cyber culture. And we are seeing, as Torbjörn said, depending on the type of business that organizations and shipping companies run. For example, tanker operators have been using TMSA, the Tanker Management Self-Assessment Tool, for several years, and that includes cyber elements in there. So we are seeing that they are much more receptible into discussions about cyber, and they can understand what is at stake. In less mature organizations, there's a challenge in getting the message across. But I think the cultural element is very important in this discussion.
Okay. And Spiro, especially now that people are working from home, do you think that that cultural element is adding a bit more vulnerability to the overall system?
Yes, I think as mentioned earlier, working from home is an additional challenge, and I believe that there were a number of operational challenges to what devices are being used, if they are authorized devices, if they are updated, and how they connect to the office when they need to have access to infrastructure or to resources that are in the office environment. So all these, yes, they have brought an additional challenge. But I think not only to shipping companies, to everyone under these circumstances. But I think again that for shipping companies, most of them, they were quite, let's say, acquainted to have people working remotely, because I think one of the major challenges that shipping companies faced is that people could not travel. And these people that are traveling and are traveling all over the world are working remotely. So I think that overall it was, it took, I guess, a lot of work from the people responsible for the IT infrastructure of the shipping companies, the IT administrators, and those responsible for cybersecurity. But I think that overall, most of them, they have dealt quite good with this.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Spiro. Just a final question to Torben before I start moving to the chat box, because I can see that the whole floor is getting on fire. Do you think, Torben, that the human element, and because we tackled a lot about it, is an important factor for cyber defense? And do you think that maritime companies invest in that?
Difficult to say for the industry as a whole, to be honest. The answer from my side is perhaps a little bit more, I don't know. I think it varies. I can say for our organization, it's incredibly important, and we look at the human firewall as the first line of defense, and we spend a lot of effort on training people in the front line, whether that means the crew on board the ship who've got their own programs that they have to go through before they join the ship, to reminder type activities and lessons that they'll take, but also the office staff. We're doing something every single month for the entire office staff globally, whether it's a 5-minute survey, a 15-minute video, I guess planned phishing campaigns, and so on and so forth. Because I do think it is critically important that people are aware, and that's the first line of defense. Reality is that we can't trust anyone. We're all human. We're all going to make a mistake, and the challenge is that those mistakes will happen. And so that's when the next layer of the onion comes into play, and it's very, very important to have as many of those layers as you possibly can in a very structured and I guess systematic, well-defined way, to make sure that what is probably going to be the most likely route into your organization is also the one that is most heavily protected against.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just picking up one of the questions coming from George. That one comes from George. Is asking, are the passenger ships organized in brackets architecture-wise for the OET systems to confront the sophisticated attacks? George, Spiro?
The passenger ships.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think it depends. It depends on the type of passenger ship and on the operations. We have passenger ships like large cruise vessels. I think they have extended and sophisticated infrastructure on board. And we have passenger ships that are smaller, or they do some regional operations, where probably the situation is quite different. So I think we cannot put a label to this. I think it will vary a lot if we see overall in this sector.
Perfect. Crony, anybody else wants to pick up that question?
I would like to add very briefly that I fully agree with what Spiro said, but the additional element that comes into play in the passenger ship side is that the passenger on board ships want internet connectivity, And the important element is that we should understand that most of the companies that are providing these solutions, the cruise liners, for example, or smaller ships, they use only one satellite internet connection. Bigger cruise vessels can have separate antennas for their passenger side, but also for the crew and the business side. But smaller vessels have only one antenna. So if you rely only to one internet connection, no matter the level of segregation that you introduce to the network, there are still vulnerabilities that can be exploited. And because George's question talks about sophisticated attacks, then a sophisticated attack does have ways of bypassing and jumping around from segmented networks. But I don't want to go to a lot of technical details, but my take is that because of the complexity of passenger ships specifically, it is a very big consideration.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Then we have another question comes from Mr. Progoulakis. He's asking if we have any data suggesting similar attack and threats statistics for offshore oil and gas assets. I'm not aware of any. Does anybody have any information about that? From everybody response.
I would like to share actually that from the table that I shared, some offshore drilling units did have issues in the past where their PNT, position navigation and timing system, was affected by specific malware. But what we are seeing as a consultancy working in the offshore oil and gas sector as well, we are seeing the more or less, like Torbjörn said at the very beginning, the typical surge of ransomware and malware related phishing emails that are sent, taking advantage of the current pandemic. Nothing that's focusing specifically in the industry.
Okay, perfect. And another one that comes from Athena is, how could shipping companies improve the experience for an incident concerning cybersecurity? And that's a very important issue because, we're talking about data. It seems that there are not many data around, how we can share that kind of information. And it's an issue that a lot of us we have faced in the past. Spiro?
Yeah, just the question is how a shipping company can share the information of an incident.
Yes, concerning a cybersecurity attack.
Well, I think that overall in all industries there is a certain level of sensitivity about cybersecurity incidents. So I'm not sure how this can be shared. However, for the maritime industry, I think there are a couple. At least I know one organization that helps towards this direction by providing a platform where someone can share anonymously, can share information, can provide some experience from cybersecurity incidents, and this is a platform designed for security officers or CIOs, and it can be, let's say, an ecosystem where information can be shared in a way that it will not generate or create issues with from the nature of the incident. So this is, I think, one option. And on the other hand, I think that there are service providers, companies. It's a quite extended ecosystem of companies and people working in this and operating in this sector that can provide also an environment where information can be shared and experiences can be shared.
Okay, thank you very much, Spiro. Crony?
I think what Spiros is saying is more or less what we're seeing in other industries. And these are the ISACs, the Information Sharing and Analysis Centers. And we are seeing that recently the shipping industry has started to develop such centers. There is the Maritime Transportation System, ISAC, in the US, which is leading that engagement. I know for a fact that the European Union Cybersecurity Agency, ENISA, is also working on a similar project regarding a maritime-specific ISAC. There are also other ISACs about aviation, the railways. So these are safe communities where members can share information about incidents that they have dealt with and the measures that they have taken to address them in an anonymous way and in a secure environment. Because the importance here, since we are talking about an intangible threat, the importance is to have that trust between the members to share the nitty-gritty details, if I can call them that, on incidents that have occurred and have affected companies.
Okay, thanks for that, Ronnie. But how that kind of initiation happens? Is that the government that is they're working with the maritime industry in the area of the cybersecurity can initiate that kind of responses? Do you think that, Torbjörn, the governments can work with the maritime sector in the areas of cybersecurity is going to be beneficial or not?
Oh, absolutely. I do. I think this, if I kind of perhaps go back to that previous question a little bit and just my own reflections of it, one of the challenges, or I guess there are two challenges. One is reputation. Right? No one wants to be the organization that says I've been attacked. The other side of it is that there's an enormous potential fine that could come with it if you are responsible for leaking information that is considered private. And that puts up an enormous wall for any company to want to share this kind of incident. And yet at the same time, it is a situation where very often you're looking at at IT departments that themselves are constructed to support the business, to build and maintain systems to further sort of the economic activity of or the services of the company. Generally speaking, they're not cybersecurity experts, and I think one of the biggest challenges that faces the industry is this asymmetric relationship between traditional IT and the sophistication of cyber criminals. So I only applaud any of these kinds of forums where there is an opportunity to learn and share experiences. But as you said, Stavros, you have to have that level of trust, and I would just hope that more companies would do so, because we're all in this together in that sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Great. Do you think, Ronnie, that governments rely to international regulatory bodies for maritime cyber regulation, or is it just a matter of trust, as Torbjörn just mentioned?
Sorry, Stavros, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Do you think that the governments rely to international regulatory bodies for maritime cyber regulation, or is it a matter of trust, of trying to create some kind of synergies like the ISACs that you mentioned earlier on? So
that's a very interesting question, because I think that the shipping sector specifically is unique because it uses the concept of flag states. So we are seeing that even though Greece, for example, has, according to statistics, the larger fleet in the world, the larger market share, if we go to actual ships that are registered under the Greek flag, they're not the first one. So the government element in there is a bit tricky because is it the flag state that should impose the regulations? Is it the government that the ships are owned from? So that's a tricky approach. But I do believe that initially it's an industry-driven initiative. The IMO, as the overarching authority, has introduced some guidelines which are on purpose abstract, and it's up to the industry itself to try and interpret it and introduce specific solutions. And drawing to, because I do see the questions here, and sorry for that, but drawing on what Yosif is asking, the different standards, the directives, the frameworks that exist out there is a guideline, is a roadmap that can help organizations start the cyber journey, but it's up to the specific organization, and I'm sure both Spiros and mostly Torbjörn agree that it's the organization that knows its internal architecture, its unique environment, and it's up to the organization to adapt and adopt to these guidelines?
Spiro?
Yes, I fully agree with Chronis. Indeed, shipping is it's a little bit different as an industry compared to others. We could say it's an international business. Vessels are moving all around the world, and we have the concept of the flag state. So I think that I think what we have seen in the poll, in the diagram, that the poll that Chronis had during his presentation, that the replies were actually evenly distributed between flag states, governments, classification societies. I think this represents, I believe, the reality. Flag states are the ones that can take the regulations and make it more make it and impose these regulations to vessels that are flying the specific flags. Classification societies have a very important role. I think something that it is important also in shipping is that a vessel is being built. It uses technology that is available at the time that the vessel is built, and it is designed to operate for 30, 50 years maybe. And any changes after the vessel is built they are very difficult and they are very costly. So the specifications based on which the vessels are built are very important. So classification societies can have an important role in this, setting maybe specifications or guidelines for cyber secure vessels. We have seen such initiatives. And also governments, because governments are probably the ones that can impose all these guidelines and regulations that are not mandatory. For example, in the United States recently, we had the United States Coast Guard practically issued a notice for the vessels that are entering U.S. territorial waters, regardless if they are flying U.S. flag or regardless if they are flying U.S. flag or other flag, that they have to meet specific requirements for cybersecurity resilience on board. And if these requirements are not met, then the vessels might be detained until they comply with these requirements. So the government in this context can play an important role, but also I'm not sure if it is the P&I clubs, but generally the insurance element in shipping. There has been discussions about how cybersecurity might affect the insurance that the vessels need to have, and I think there are a lot of thoughts there that probably vessels that meet the requirements and they have a certain level of cybersecurity and resilience to cyber attacks, they will have better conditions. They will receive better conditions from the insurers. So all these entities will play, I think, an important role and will define the market conditions, which practically will drive the developments.
Okay, thank you, Spiro. Just trying to add a question that comes from Mr. Progoulakis is that, do you consider that existing cyber security risk analysis tools and methods as suggested by current standards and directives like the IMO, the USCG, ABS guidelines are sufficient to tackle current threats and attack scenarios in the proactive and reactive manner? Because we're talking about the governments and all the stakeholders, but do you think what we have already is good enough, or we have to further develop and build?
My perspective on that is that these guidelines, I think they do a good job of talking to the human, talking to the processes, talking to the types of collateral that you should have in place in order to tackle this. Where I think they fall short today is the real technical side of things. what kinds of technology have you got deployed in the network to detect, to analyze, to prevent lateral movement, all of the I guess the technology or tools that you're going to need to actually be effective in this job, or at least preventative in your role as an IT manager responsible for the IT equipment on board a ship. That element, I think, is missing, and there are a lot of reasons for it. I mean, cost is one, connectivity is another one. These tools typically are designed for connected networks, where you have access to the internet, where you have access to algorithms that can do a lot of the analytics heavy lifting for you, but all of that's based in the cloud, and those sorts of things are not on board and available. So my perspective on this is yes, it does set up a very good guideline for you, but it's missing the tool side. I don't know, Cronus, if you agree with that statement.
Yeah, Torbjörn, I think I mean, from your perspective, absolutely, it is important to include the technical solutions in there, but I think sometimes, and having discussed this with classification societies that have published these guidelines, they try to be technology agnostic. So even though they are overall saying that you should apply an intrusion detection system, for example, or an intrusion prevention system, they're not going to go into the detail of letting you know what should be the specifics of that tool, because they will, in a way, point you to a specific solution. And they are trying to avoid that in order to keep their validity and their accountability in the industry. It is a tricky issue. They don't actually, like I said, they don't include that into the guidelines. But if you go into discussions with them, and we do the same thing, if someone comes to Hudson, we are going to make recommendations because we see how effective these tools are, but we're never going to publish anything indicating that, for example, Angel from Navarino is the perfect solution and go with that.
Okay, perfect. Another question that comes from the chat box from Mr. George Potamos is, does the need for real-time cybersecurity awareness exist, and if yes, at what kind of level? Crony, could you take that one?
Thank you, Stavro. The training element sits very close to my heart because I don't know, I am an academic at heart, but anyway, and I do a lot of teaching also here at the University of Warwick. I think the cyber awareness element is a very important element, and we should look at the human factor, as Professor Nikitakos mentioned in one of his comments. Actually,
I was coming to that in a minute.
Sorry, not as the weakest link. We are not, don't look at all of us and your crew as the weakest link, but we should look at ourselves as the first line of defense. And this is something that I always point out in any discussions that I am included, both at the university, but also any other engagement in conferences. We are the first line of defense. We should know, first of all, what the threats are. We should be trained in order to be able to identify a potential malicious email, a phishing email, but at the same time, we should receive training on how to use the technology solutions, the technical solutions that are applied in our organization safely and securely. So it's not only the awareness part, but it's also the user element, how to use everything. Real-time cyber awareness is sometimes a challenge because we are talking about the global industry, like the shipping industry. Look at all of us now. We are in 4 or 5 time zones right now. So doing real-time awareness is difficult, but there are ways out there with synchronous and asynchronous learning in order to increase that level of awareness. Okay,
thank you. Anybody wants to add on that question? Torbjörn, you think it's going to be something that having a cybersecurity awareness, a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, I can only echo what Cronus said. I think it is absolutely critical. The human element is the first line of defense here, and it's also the easiest. And therefore, having people as prepared as they can be is really something that's critically important for any organization. And regardless of where people are deployed in that organization, if it's on board or on shore. So the challenge is, again, it's the same. How do you people have a job to do. You can't continually pepper them with fishing training or fishing training or some of these other things that are there. They'll get fatigue as well. But at the same time, gamification, finding different angles at which to approach it, that is it's a very, very important topic and should be part of even the HR element in this is as a partnership between whoever's responsible for security in the organization, working with HR to have these programs and continually run them is a very critical thing.
Perfect. And as you mentioned, the human element, I'll go back to the question that Professor Nikitakos has done. How important is to have that kind of guards of the system? Because humans, from what I'm gathering, we can consider them as the guards of the system. How important is to examine the psychology and the behavior of them, especially under the current COVID situation?
One of the things that we've done, which actually we're about to do, which I'm really looking forward to, is we have a tool that will send out phishing emails, simulations, and that tool will automatically, if someone is caught, will reschedule their phishing training, and it goes in this wonderful positive loop. So yes, I think it really is critical to have these human guards. I don't know if that answers the question, but I just can't emphasize it enough.
Spiro, is it the same from the technical perspective? Having those guards being the ultimate tool, or we can supplement it with anything else, you think?
I think that maybe there are some, let's say, options to provide some efficient training and efficient methods to increase the cyber awareness of the crew on board. I think that the crew members, they have a lot of work to do. They have a lot of training to do. They have certifications to take. So it's not so easy to constantly, bombard them with such new information. So there are ways to provide to increase the cyber awareness on board, but also I think there are methods to take part of this burden from the crew and transfer it to the shore, where so systems that can be managed remotely, that require less intervention from the crew, that can be managed centrally, so that the crew will have more flexibility on board.
Okay.
I think maybe this is also an option.
And do you think, Spiro, that, as I'm seeing the question from Remco here, that autonomous shipping could be an answer to that kind of human element issue? And can you see any kind of cybersecurity relationship or any studies that you're aware of, as Remco is asking? Cybersecurity with autonomous shipping?
I don't have a specific study in mind. I think that there is a lot of discussion about autonomous shipping. And I think that there are a lot of steps that have to be taken in order to reach there. In any case, cybersecurity will be a major point that has to be addressed in order to have in any form of autonomous ships. So definitely it is really important, but I'm not sure how this will be addressed. I think that it is something interesting that we will see in the next probably couple of decades developing.
Torben, do you think that autonomous shipping is going to be a big issue for the crew, and how cyber attacks could probably affect them?
Well, if we are at autonomous shipping, I don't think the crew will be that affected. They'll probably be sitting in an office or a control room somewhere in that sense. I know that this is a field that is getting a lot of attention, and there's a number of different studies that are going on, whether it's in Tokyo Bay or in Scandinavia. There's a lot going on in this space, but I think it's going to be quite a long time. As Spiro said, we're probably talking decades before we are even as autonomous as perhaps an airplane is, to be honest. So I think we've got quite a few years to go, and between now and then, the sophistication of these cyber incidents or cyber criminals is really only going to increase. So I think we need to sort of look at the present and make sure that our fortresses, whether that's the human side or the technical side, are continue to be fortified, to be honest.
Perfect. I'm just conscious about the time slightly, and I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in, but is it relevant to demand what software providers include artificial intelligence assisted alerts which are upgraded regularly? And that's a question that comes from Jens Erik. Spiro, can you tackle that one?
Mm-hmm. This is, I believe that this is part of the steps that someone can take in order to increase the cybersecurity of their assets, either if it is the office or if it is the vessel. So there are certain steps. One is to have operational systems, either on the vessel or on the office, that provide the cybersecurity element. And then, of course, there are solutions that are adding another layer, which is becoming very important as the threats are becoming more sophisticated, which actually, yes, include the artificial intelligence assisted and behavioral analysis of the data collected from the sites, either office or vessel, and they can provide more comprehensive response to incidents. They can provide forensics for an incident that have taken place. They can provide easier ways to do vulnerability assessments, generally to assess the risk, the cybersecurity risk of the asset. So this is, I think, definitely this is something that the industry is moving towards, not only for shipping, but also in other industries that it is already available and applicable.
Thank you, Spiro. Chronic?
Yep.
So very briefly, again, because of time, one thing that we should not forget, I said previously that there are digital trends coming into the shipping industry and transforming the industry, as Spiros has very aptly described. But we should be very cautious not to lose operational knowledge on how to do things manually. And like I said, drawing from our experience as a Navy officer, when I was in the Naval Academy, we were trained how to use the sextant in order to do astronomical navigation. Then we were trained to use to take bearings, visual bearings, to do coastal navigation. But nowadays we're only using GPS and EGDIS. So it is important, and we are seeing from examples both in our industry but other industries, that it's the knowledge of individuals on doing things manually that is very important in order to be the first line of defense in the incident response mechanism that the organization has to deploy in order to be able to go back on business as early as possible. It is important to have all the software and all the tools in place to facilitate our everyday lives, but we should not lose the knowledge on doing things manually, because when we're going to respond, when we will have to respond to an incident, we won't have the software solutions available in order to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question that comes from Mari Dimitropoulou is like, what do you think about the appointment of a cybersecurity officer? Torben, do you think it's a good idea? I can see Ron is moving up and down. No? Torben, we can't hear you. Sorry, you're muted.
I've typical working from home. I can hear stuff in my background, so I mute between. I apologize. I think on board that's a challenge. I think it's an unrealistic expectation to be able to have someone trained and taking on that role. Having that role in your organization, absolutely, absolutely, and then that role or that team helping to feed the organization with information, whether that's training, whether that's processes, procedures, check-ins, audits, all of those things, also very critically important. So that's how I feel about it. One of the things, interestingly, that we're seeing now is a demand for, and something we're going to start in 2021 is actually just basic IT training for the crew on board. I mean, we're seeing that more and more the crew need to have an awareness or basic awareness of IT infrastructure, IT infrastructure management. So that's something that we are introducing. But I think to go as far as a cybersecurity officer is an unreasonable expectation for the crew. And I think I agree very much with what Spiro said. We should offload that responsibility to a shore-based security operations center to manage on their behalf.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Torbjörn. Ronnie, because I've seen you knocking your head up and down, just a final point, and if we can start wrapping up from your side, please.
So yeah, I fully agree with Torbjörn. I have to say that it's difficult to have a dedicated cybersecurity officer, but you need to have someone on board who will be responsible and accountable for cybersecurity, which is some wording used in SMSs around the world and in the shipping industry. Because you need to have a go-to person on board the ship if you see something's wrong. To round up, the only thing I have to say, and drawing from some of the comments, is that there are a lot of tools out there that can make it easier for organizations initially to raise awareness, but also to deploy specific technical and technology solutions in any organization. But the most important part that I would like to stress from this event is that the first thing that any organization should do is to know its ecosystem. The organization should know what are the critical assets that it has, what are the critical services that it is providing, and any organization should start by looking at protecting or minimizing the risk of a cyber incident that will affect those specific assets and services. And then they can take it from there. Thank you, Stavros.
Thank you, Ronnie. Spiro, any final points, any wrap-ups from the session today?
Yes, I think that going back to the lessons that we discussed in the beginning, that one of the points there is to study before the introduction of new technology. So to have an awareness of what is being introduced, either in the office or on the vessel. On the vessel is more difficult because on the ships there are remote sites with all the challenges that Torbjörn mentioned. So it is to study and have an understanding of what are the new technologies introduced, what are the new systems, evaluate the cyber risk that this might have, and take the necessary actions for mitigating these risks. I think this is something that it is at least what I view it as relevant, because as we mentioned during this last period, this last year, there were a lot of processes that were accelerated, a lot of things happened really fast, and I think that this is something that we should look into so that we have a successful implementation moving forward, with digitalization becoming more important and more expanded on vessels.
Thank you. And Torbjörn, any final points and wrap up, please?
Sure. Just maybe two things. One, echoing what Kronis said about inventory and doing a risk assessment. I think it's a critical activity that every organization should do. I think in addition to that, I would just say, as you've done with joining this webinar, start to inform yourself, get involved, do the research, speak to people, get engaged, because this is a very broad, complex arena, and it's something that is really only growing in importance for every organization in every industry.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you all, the participants and the presenters, for the really amazing discussion that we had. Apologize that we haven't managed to tackle all the questions, but I've seen the chat box was on fire, so hopefully we could try to tackle some of them offline if possible. We'll have to chat with the organizers, of course, before I promise anything. And thank you all. Thank you, Chroni, Torbjörn, and Spiro. Thanks all the participants. I would just it's really appreciated what is happening, and it's a very important topic at the moment, what is happening, and hopefully we can continue that kind of discussion. I'm just handing over back to Maria. Maria, thank you very much once again.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you for your insights. I think it was very interesting and fruitful discussion. I really enjoyed, and I have seen many good comments coming from the audience. That's makes me very happy. So thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I hope you enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in one of our future events. Let me wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and a COVID-free New Year. Thank you all. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.